If you are the parent of a teenager and you are concerned about your teenager's behavior and their well being, this video is for you. This video is so that you can hear from me, someone who was a quote unquote troubled teen. I say that term sarcastically, but I was someone who, as a teenager, struggled with depression and anxiety and self harm, and I was suicidal. And if you've been paying attention to the news recently, you have likely now heard of the troubled teen industry, which is essentially a network of programs ranging from wilderness therapy to residential treatment centers to therapeutic boarding schools that claim to help struggling teens get back on the right path. And this industry has a legacy that is rooted. It originated essentially in a cult that existed in the 60s and then used those tactics, including brainwashing and sleep deprivation and isolation, to attempt to mold troubled teenagers into more responsible, accountable, conscientious adults. And this industry has been receiving a lot more attention recently because of Paris Hilton, who came out about it, and then this last week, a docuseries called The Program on Netflix by Catherine Kubler. So, a lot of parents who are struggling with their struggling teen are, I believe, many of them, like you, do want to be the best parent that you can be for your teenager. You want to equip your child with the tools that they need to thrive in adulthood, to have their emotional needs met, and to be successful in the future in whatever path they so choose. And clearly, as we have seen, the existing systems and programs in place are they are not just outdated, they are abusive and they are harmful, and they are not effective for the most part. So, my intention in making this video and in sharing what I do online is to try and offer what I think would have been useful for me as a teenager, what I see being useful for the teens and the families that I work with. So, the purpose of this video today is to talk about how you can make a stronger connection with your child. Because the truth is, when families, for the most part, get to a point where they are considering an intervention like sending their kid to a program, there were so many steps before where an intervention should have been made. And not an intervention meaning their child should have been sent away at an earlier point, but something should have changed in the family system, in the parent-child dynamic, in the environment that the child is living in. When someone is at the point where a family is considering inpatient or residential treatment, there were so many moments before, so many opportunities before that decision point where something could have changed that would have fundamentally shifted things for the child. And I believe, and this is what I have seen, and there is extensive research that would support what I'm about to say, that a child's relationship with caring, supportive, and stable adults is one of the most important factors in their well being and their maturation and their development. And you, as the parent, have an enormous impact on your child's well being, on their self esteem, on their self concept, on their safety. So, what I want to share with you today is how you can make a more positive and supportive relationship with your child so that you can really be someone who is in their corner and who is guiding them and who is supporting them as they become an adult in today's world. So I won't go too into my own story in this video, but to just give you a little bit of context about who I am and why I am sharing about this and where my insights and reflections are coming from. I struggled so much as a teenager. I really had struggles with my mental health from the time I was quite young. Um, but when I became a teenager, my life just started to slowly come apart at the seams. And I was self harming regularly. I was lying to my parents all the time. I was sneaking around. I stopped going to school. I had issues with food, and I made some suicide attempts. And I went through many, many different types of treatment at home, including many therapists and many different cycles of medication and an intensive outpatient program. And eventually I got sent to first a residential hospital and then a wilderness therapy and then a therapeutic boarding school. I actually wrote an article about my experience in wilderness therapy. It was published in The Guardian, and I will link to that here so you can read it if you are interested. The therapeutic boarding school that I went to was a horrible place that is now since closed. It, like many of the programs and schools that are coming to light, used cult like tactics to try and force students into compliance. And really, a lot of these programs, if we even just look at the language of the troubled teen industry, it assigns all of this blame and ownership to the teenager. The teenager is the one who is troubled. And I think that what we now know um, is that people are products of their environment and people are influenced by their environment. So it is not that there is any one person in a family system who is the culprit or who is the sole bearer of responsibility for the state of that family system. This person rather is absorbing what is happening around them and is reflecting back to the adults around them, in a way, the state of the family system. It's almost like I think a lot of people who were sent away as teenagers have what I call emotional sunburn. It's like they were so affected by things that were happening around them that they bore this pain and this injury from their environment. And with that, I also know in my case, there were many, many dangerous and deceptive and dysfunctional behaviors that I engaged in. And I do not mean to excuse myself from some of the lies that I told my parents or some of the choices I made. And I also now know as an adult that those were adaptations that I was learning for how I could function in an environment I didn't know how to function in. So I don't mean to suggest that I was completely innocent or that there was nothing that I needed to learn or understand about myself. But the ways in which many of these programs approach trying to teach a teenager life skills is to pin so much responsibility on them and to almost drown them in shame. And the scars of being in programs like this remain for so many survivors for decades after they leave. So I will share more about the specifics of my journey in another video, but I want to get to why I'm sharing with you today about how you can connect with your teenager. If you were to stop watching this video in the next couple minutes, there are two things I want you to take away before you do, though I'm obviously going to say a little bit more. But the first thing to know is do not take your teenager's behavior personally. And what I mean by that is because I know I just said that teenagers are a product of their family system. And so, yes, I want you as the parent to be curious about your behavior and your roles in the family system. But I also want you to know that your teenager, while they are your child, they are their own being and their own agent in the world. And if they are making choices that you don't approve of, it's not meant as an insult to you. If they are somewhat distant from you because they're exploring a new interest or taking more time to spend with friends, it's not meant to diminish you or to reject you completely. So I want you to know that your teenager is a person in the world. They are developing into an adult, and their choices are theirs. And the second thing I want you to know is don't stop trying. I think one of the things that surprises parents the most when I share with them about what I see in their children and what I know in their children is that your teenager wants a better relationship with you too. They really, really do. And I know that because they can be pushing you away so much, or there can be so much distance in the relationship, and it seems that they're creating that. It seems that they want nothing to do with you. And there are reasons why they're creating the distance. And there will be a healthy amount of that no matter what during this stage of life. And they so much want a strong relationship with you as well. They really, really do. So know those two things going into this, if there are only two takeaways. But I'm going to talk through a little bit now about the connection that you can build with your teenager. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is individuation. Individuation is essentially someone becoming an individual in the world, becoming independent. And this truly is the primary task of your teenager. They're trying to figure out who they are. They're trying to figure out where they fit in the world, who their people are, what they care about. They're trying to discover and establish their own identity independent of the family system. I think oftentimes parents are very unprepared for the feeling of loss that comes when their child, who maybe used to be really close to them and was like their little buddy. I hear parents say that a lot, like, oh, she used to be like my little buddy. Parents are unprepared for the feeling of loss that comes when their child starts to become a teenager and they were like this, and now the teenager is starting to move away. So know that it's okay to feel that loss. It's okay to feel sadness and grief when there is a change in the closeness and connection that you once had with your child. And also to know that that's totally normal. And being aware of it can help you not project it out in anger at your child or in frustration with the situation, but rather you can understand that this is a feature, this distancing is a feature of the developmental stage. And also know that this distancing currently, if your child is a teen, this is an overcorrection. They're pulling away not as an insult to you specifically, but because of their primary need to individuate. When I was a teenager, I was so distant from my parents and so closed off to them in lots of ways, and was very almost allergic to a lot of their suggestions that they would give me because I was like, I need to be my own person. So I need to go find me. And anything that has to do with you, I got to run the other way. And then as I got older and I was no longer a teenager, I could kind of come back around here. I'm obviously not as close as I was when I was a child, but I'm not so far away. I'm at a healthy distance. So this is not their final resting point, and they're in an overcorrection right now. And when I could kind of come back as a young adult and be closer to my parents, then I could actually listen to some of their suggestions and kind of be like, okay, I can kind of hear things that you're saying, and maybe that thing you said was actually a good idea. But the second thing to know is that even though they're doing this and they're distancing, they still really, really need you and want you there. I remember one time I was extremely upset and I went upstairs and I was like, I don't want to talk to anyone. Everyone leave me alone. And I was bawling. I was crying my eyes out, and I closed the door and I'm crying on my bed for a while. And then eventually I open the door and I kind of listen, and I can't hear any that anyone's in the house. And I come downstairs and they had left. My family had gone out somewhere. Even though I had been pushing for this independence and pushing to be left alone, I still wanted them there. I still wanted to know that they cared enough to stick with me through my anger and my outburst. And I think that this just illustrates how, even though teenagers are distancing, they still really want to know that there is the closeness and security and support of their parents. And it can be really confusing to the teenager because they're like, I want you, but I don't want you. But I need you, but I don't want to need you. So just know that even though they're pushing you away in times, you don't have to go and, invade their space if they're in their room. But this is a moment where you can slide a note under the door, or you can stay downstairs and wait for them to come when maybe they're ready. So, all this to say, do not underestimate the impact of your care and your presence in their life. One of the best things you can do to improve your relationship with your teenager is to practice listening without judgment. When your teen is sharing with you about their day at school or something that happened with a friend, focus on just listening. Active listening is an acquired skill, and it's when you are more focused on understanding what the person is saying to you rather than focusing on responding and thinking ahead to what you're going to say next. And naturally, when your teen is talking, you might be having many thoughts, like you want to point something out to them, like, oh, you could have done this differently, or you want to give them advice. But think of how you feel when you're talking to a friend and you're sharing about something that happened. And maybe they respond by saying, oh, well, you shouldn't be upset about that. Or they say, well, here's how you could have done that differently. Or they respond by saying, that sounds really tough. I totally get why you're upset. Do you want to talk about it? And I'm not saying that you can never share any reflections or thoughts with your child, but in those moments when they're coming to you and wanting to share, they're rarely hearing that anyway. Like, even if you're giving them the best advice in the world, if they're just wanting to talk, it's kind of in one ear and out the other. They usually just want to be heard. So know that you don't need to solve the problem. You don't need to have the perfect solution. Just focus on being present and listening to them. The second thing is to connect with your teen besides on just what's going wrong. When you are concerned about your teenager's behavior and their safety, that can become the main point of connection, as in you're always connecting on what's going wrong and what needs to be changed and what needs to be addressed. It's just this like continuous loop of like, did you do this? Did you do that? Are you following up with that therapist? Did you remember that deadline? And so like the whole relationship is kind of filtered through what's going wrong. That's like what you're connecting on all the time. So it's really important, if you are concerned about your teenager's behavior, to connect with them on more than just your fears and concerns. This could be just going and running errands together and getting a cup of coffee, watching a show, just having agendaless time where you're just focused on connecting. Do your best to remain open and approachable. Going back to what I said at the beginning, parents often feel so rejected from their teenager. I'm doing this like distancing movement again, but parents, they often feel so rejected by their teenager. They're like, they don't want anything to do with me. And it might be the case right now that if you're inviting your teenager to spend time with you or spend time with a family, they might be brushing you off or be withdrawn. But I want to say again, do not underestimate the impact of your care. There are few things that matter more in your child's life than the fact that you are invested in their well being and that you believe in them, particularly when things are difficult. I constantly said to my mom that I could not wait to be old enough that I could move away and, never see her again. And my great scheme, my plan for myself was that I was going to move to Nebraska and live in a cabin and write the next great American novel. And despite how much I pushed her away, she would still continue to invite me to do things. And there was one day she invited me to go on a drive with her. I was having a really tough day. And I said yes that day. And we went on this beautiful drive out to Point Reyes. I grew up in San Francisco and got these really delicious lemon scones and went through the redwood trees. And I still remember that day, even though I probably turned her down 50 times before I finally said yes. So even in the face of rejection from your teenager, do your best to remain open and approachable. One thing my mom actually said to me when I asked her, what do you wish you had done differently? Is she said that she wishes she'd sooner sort of given me the permission to be who I was instead of holding me to this ideal that she had for me. So my mom grew up on a little farm in Ireland, hence the Gaelic spelling of my name. And she was the first person in her family to go to college. And she really valued education. So when I was in high school and I was at grade schools and I wasn't taking it very seriously, that was very challenging for her. And for her to kind of let go of the timeline that she had in mind for me, of the vision that she had in mind for me, probably brought up, well, not probably, because she said this to me, brought up grief for her and loss for her. And she had to do that because I was not just her ideal version of a kid. I was not just, you know, a figure in some ultimate vision that she had. And so she said, like, I wish I'd been aware of when I was trying to have you live out the dream of who I thought you should be versus recognizing you have your own life project. This is one of the hardest things for parents to come to terms with. And this is what enables you to actually get to know who your child is. One of the girls I worked with said that when she felt like, this is what she said, when I felt like my mom finally released this idealized version of me, I actually wanted to be around her more because I no longer had to dull parts of myself or hide parts of myself. I could just show up as who I am. And if you think about it, like people want to go places where they feel accepted. People want to be around people who respect them and who bring out the best in them. And so if a child feels like their parent is always holding them to this really, really high standard that is not always even in line with who the child wants to be, that's not a relationship they're going to feel drawn to spend time in. And again, this does not mean that you can't give your child life advice. It doesn't mean that you can't have boundaries in your home. I'm talking about who they are on like a soul level, like who they are at their core. Can you be in acceptance of that? That is going to change how your child feels around you if they feel like you really, really not just accept, but love them for who they are. And the last thing I want to say is relate to your child as someone who is whole and healed. I certainly felt from my family that I was the problem child. And I get it. You could say I earned that label. And there was such a part of me that felt so unseen by that. Like, there was this part of me that was like, that's not all I am. I'm so much more than just my behavior. I'm so much more than this. Why can't you see that? Why can't you see who I really am? And I wanted to be received and seen as someone who was trustworthy and reliable. And I could feel that my family didn't see me that way. And I know on my side, I also want to say I can't speak for everyone. I can only speak for myself. In terms of other teenagers who have gone through this industry, I definitely did have to demonstrate to my family that I could be that way, that I could be trustworthy and reliable and responsible. And I also did feel so encouraged when I could finally feel that they saw the potential for that in me. As I've said, oftentimes when there is so much chaos in a family system and that becomes the main point of connection, the parent and child are always relating through what's going wrong. And the child starts to internalize that perspective. Like my parents just see me as something that needs to be fixed. They just see me as this bad kid. You can relate to your child through the knowing of, I see the brilliance in you. I see the power in you. I see the inherent goodness in you. And they can feel that too. I know that that is what your child wants from you. I really, really know that teenagers want their parents to be people who accept them, who don't judge them, who love them, who see the goodness in them. And if you are interested in learning more about how you can support and understand your teenager, I have a free support group on Facebook that you are invited to join. I post lots of live videos in there on these topics, and I will link that below. So, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me today. Thank you to all of the survivors who are sharing their stories right now. And thank you to all the people who are part of this movement that is bringing about more humanity to this process of recovery and recognizing the wholeness and the goodness in each and every one of us. So I hope I see you next time. Thank you again.